Collecting art has always been more than just putting artwork on your walls. It's not about buying an object, it's about participating into developing an ecosystem. It's about supporting the artist and supporting the galleries and supporting that wider artistic ecosystem.
This is The Bigger Picture, an inside look at the businesses that make the art world work and the stories behind the people that shape them. Today we are joined by Sarah Le Quang Sang, founder and director of SLQS Gallery and former co-director of the Procreate project. This show is brought to you by Arcata, the leading due diligence network specifically built for the art market and trusted by over 450 members. To understand how Arcata can help you comply and succeed with challenging regulations, go to arcata.com. So thanks for joining us today, Sarah. I wanted to start off with the question I ask everyone really, which is whether you'd always had a career in the art market or the art world in mind, or whether it's something sort of merged and crept up on you.
So yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really pleased to be here. I don't think I had a career in the arts in my mind when I was young. I think it's something, the art has always been part of my life and has always filled my life. I grew up learning to play the piano and dancing. A key moment was when I was 18 and I took a gap year in Paris, and I studied theatre, acting, and that very much opened up a passion, and something that I thought, oh, okay, this is what I really enjoy doing, and this is what I really want to do. But I didn't have a career in mind as such. So I think it's something that's always been part of my life. I went to study international business, finance, and economics at the University of Manchester. So that very much was not artistic, but I spent my entire life at uni, directing plays. And so my artistic life has always been very parallel to my work career in a sense. And I think now opening the gallery has been a way of not living two parallel lives, but unifying everything, which is very satisfying. But no, it's something that I think has built up over time.
I mean, you had a really multicultural background. It says here you lived in Cameroon, France, UK. I don't know if your family were artists, but I think even just being exposed to all those cultures must have had an impact on you.
Yes, I mean, so I grew up in France, next to Lyon. And I had quite a standard, I guess, average life there. Most of my memories as a child come from when I moved to Gabon when I was 9 year old. So I lived in Gabon when I was nine. And then we moved to Cameroon with my family when I was 12. And I lived in West Africa until I was 16.
That
And
sounds incredible.
it really was. I think I was immersed into, the cultural life of West Africa. My parents are non-conventional. And so I've never grew up in a really conventional family. Um, and yes, I think, it's really forged me as an individual. And it's forged my way of thinking, in terms, I was immersed into, music, art, craft, design, from West Africa. And so the way I look at art through, is not through, the Western canon of art. It's not through having studied history of art. It's really being immersed in this environment where there's an experimentation with materiality, where I can look at art and enjoy it and see what emotion it brings without having to think about where this person has trained or the techniques that they are using. And I think that's really forged my appreciation of art. I'm drawn to artists who experiment, who transform materials. I'm able to platform in the gallery artists that are self-taught, and who are pushing boundaries of materiality. And I think this really has come from, this upbringing in such a rich culture place like Gabon and Cameroon.
Quite an organic way to sort of go through a history of art, isn't it? Or an art education. And I have to ask, from that sort of really lovely, organic, experimental, amazing upbringing, and this is nothing against business as an education path, but how did you end up with the international business sort of path, as it were?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting because I've studied in France. So I've studied in the French system until I was 16, and then I came to boarding school in England when I was 16, and I did my A levels. Um, and in France, the educational system is very restrictive and it's very limited. So, you either do a career, the way the education system leads you, it leads you towards, literature, science, or business. That's where it takes you. So I arrived in England, if I had continued within the French system, I would have continued with the business education. And so this is how I arrived at. Now, I realized, but obviously a long, after being in England and after being at university, that actually the English education system is very different. You can study geography and end up working in a totally different field. Whereas in France, everything is very, very restrictive. So this is how I came into studying business. Remind me, what was the beginning of your question?
Just curious,
Sorry.
I guess, given your passions and interests, how business came about. And now, obviously, where your career's at now, it seems a really wonderful foundation. I'm guessing some of the skills that degree gave you must
Mm.
be so formative for what you do today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, like I said to you, I feel like I've been living parallel lives and I've had two parallel careers going all along. So I moved to, after university, I moved to London and I needed a job to pay my rent. And I really applied, one of my friends was applying for a job in real estate and I just applied for it. I actually thought it was going to be temporary. I thought I'm going to work here just to get my feet in London and then I'm going to transition. I was actually thinking at the time of like working in the film industry. Um, and, I just I guess I stayed, working in that company for 5 years and I climbed the ranks of this company. I became manager and I really loved it. I really enjoyed working there. I moved to Dubai in 2008, um, which was during the financial crisis and the financial crash. I arrived in Dubai when everyone was leaving. There was like a massive exodus of people moving out to Dubai. So I arrived there and I continued my career in sales and management in real estate. I became a partner of a real estate company that actually was started in 2008 in the crisis and that grew. But this time when I arrived in Dubai, I also joined an experimental theatre company, which I co-founded. And so again, I was living these two parallel lives, of yes, obviously, being a partner and a manager of a company, but then also, making theatre was an exciting theatre company that was experimental, that was existing in Dubai in a time where there was no cultural district. So it felt really exciting to be building and to be part of this new ecosystem that was being built and that we were part of. And obviously now you can look back and think, oh, we were building this. At the time, we were just experimenting. So I've always had these parallel careers. And then when I moved back to London in 2014, that's when I decided, okay, I want to do a permanent shift. I can't have these two parallel lives going on. I want to really exclusively, focus on an art career. And that's when I went to Goldsmiths and I studied the MA in performance making.
That's quite a big decision, isn't it? I'm sure it didn't feel it at the time necessarily because you had, as you say, this sort of parallel foundation forming, but it is still quite a stark decision, I guess. To then, it was Goldsmiths you went to, did you say?
Yeah.
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 And to commit to that. You're really not helping my post-summer blues of lack of travel by telling me your story. So you came back from Dubai, went to the MA, and then did your parallel lives just suddenly converge and it all come together? What was your path sort of during and after that MA?
Well, I had another parallel life that arrived, so I became a mother.
That's never disruptive or in any way life-changing.
Exactly. So I guess it was, I think, now we look back and we think, okay, this is what happened. Obviously, when you're in the moment, things are very different. It felt I had a real belief that this is what I wanted to do and this is what I had to do. And in a way, probably this is what I had postponed in doing for the last 10 years. So it felt like, now I really need to believe in myself and able to do this. Um, and yeah, so I started being at Goldsmiths. I also had a 2-year-old child at the time. I did it part-time over 2 years. The second year, I became pregnant with my second child as well. So
Sounds
I
all
guess
very relaxing. All very relaxing, yeah.
um, so I think it was entering. Well, there was lots of transitions. There was you know, being able to say, okay, this is what I'm doing now. I am an artist. And I think it's always quite daunting to be able to, because you have to self-proclaim yourself to be an artist, so there was that stage to say, now this is what I'm doing, and I'm an artist, and this is my practice. Um, there is also going to university, being much older, as a mature student, as a parent, and also having not being able to participate in everything that the other students were doing because I was running back to pick up my child in nursery, and I wasn't living in New Cross, I was living in Bethnal Green at the time. So also, not being able to fully participate into what other MA students were doing. And think at that time, this is when I started to look for other people that were in my situation. And so I was looking for other artists, other who had caring responsibility. And that's when I came across Procreate Project, which is a non-profit organization led by Diana Gravina, who essentially platforms and provides supports and opportunities for artists who have caring responsibilities. And I really wanted to find that environment because, yes, of course, when you enter the art world in your 30s with children is very different to when you enter the art world in your early 20s. I mean, it has its own challenges now, of course, but they are just different challenges to have.
And it's interesting because just hearing you talk, at the one side, there's that very sort of real challenge or set of challenges that anyone entering parenthood will understand in terms, as you say, the logistics, the time,
Mm.
the exhaustion, the not being able to be everywhere at once side of things. But also, it sounds there is that moment that I can hear you describing, or maybe I'm just recognizing it and projecting it, where your identity is kind of up in the air anyway. It
Yes.
throws up everything you are. And it kind of gives you that freedom to reorientate your own identity. And it sounds a bit like one of those experiences where that it almost gives you this weird confidence and moment of freedom to reorientate yourself and say, well, this is what I am now. It sounds like that proclamation, um, whether that was because of motherhood or just coincided with it, it feels like that was quite real for you.
Yes, absolutely. I think at the time, when I was at Goldsmiths, I mean, I had motherhood was very much a huge part of my identity. I think it happens to a lot of people who, especially when your children are so little, um, what you describe exactly, it's so all-consuming. Um, Parenthood, motherhood is very consuming at that time. And now my children are older. I don't necessarily identify so much as a mother. Of course, I am a mother, but it's not so much part of my identity. But at the time, it was very much part of my identity. But I think what I've learned over time is not to define yourself by the struggles you're experiencing, by who you are now. So at the time, I think I felt a lot of frustration towards what I couldn't do. But I think over time I've learned, well, these are my parameters. This is what I'm operating with. And what can I do with it instead of this is defining me?
Oh, I definitely needed to hear that this morning. For those that weren't in our pre-podcast conversation, I had a terrible school drop this morning. So moving on from that, or I think developing that, obviously you do the MA, you have this sort of shift or bringing together your parallel skills and interests, I guess. How does the gallery come about, and what was the initial goal or vision for it?
Yeah. I mean, I think when I did the MA, I didn't have the gallery in mind. I was still, I think the MA, because, I had been making theatre for 8 years. I did the MA in performance making, and performance making allowed me to enter a different world of theatre. It allowed me to enter the art world, to think of performance as art, as live art, and to enter, yes, so essentially to move from theatre into performance and to the wider art world. And then my experience of working with Procreate Project has allowed me to develop as a curator as well and as a producer of cultural events. So I curated the first Mother Art Prize, and I co-produced and co-curated the first symposium that we had called Oxytocin, um, which looked at the intersection of caregiving and maternal health as well. So I think these experiences, yeah, introduced me to the wider art world. And then the gallery has grown. I think the idea of opening a gallery has grown since, it just felt to me like a natural step, from curating exhibition to organizing social gathering, to talking to other artists as well. It felt that there was a need for a gallery that was commercial and at the same time unapologetic about you know, platforming and championing women and queer artists. Um, there's not enough of them. I don't think there's many that really proclaim to do this. And it felt to me like the natural step for me in terms of like gathering my skills in my career, but also in terms of something that was needed.
I love what you just said there as well about commercial and unapologetic. When we look at the artists you work with, and what sort of barriers do you feel there still are in the market rather than the art world, or maybe the art world as well, but particularly in that commercial arena for these artists that you're addressing?
Mm. I think, part of the conversations that I'm having is, well, there's a lot of systemic barriers. I mean, women and queer artists have been underrepresented. There's still a lot of inequality in terms of representation, in terms of collections. And there is a lack of understanding that, the way the artist's career trajectory is still following a path that is not suitable for most artists. So, if you have caregiving responsibility. And that's whether that is children, but actually a lot of that's also looking after elderlies. You may have gaps in your CV. You might not be, you know, you might be re-emerging in your 40s. So actually, I'm challenging these terms of emerging and mid-career because I think they don't suit the majority of artists in the market. That's these have terms and career trajectories that were mostly built by, male artists who didn't have any responsibilities and that could do, that could have that linear trajectory. And what I'm trying to, with the gallery, what I want to challenge is that, you know, life is not linear. You know,
It most definitely is not. And talking about that, I mean, we talk about caring responsibilities. I don't have any stats to hand, but I know in the UK, I don't know if other feel, but the pressure of the pandemic, there's some shocking statistics around the level of caring responsibilities, particularly on females, I believe. And that really sort of like put additional pressure on these sort of barriers and these conversations that you're outlining.
hmm. Yes, I think, and I think it's about representation, but I think it's very much about dialogue and it's very much about creating a space where, women and queer artists can feel safe about talking about their situation. And that is not going to be a barrier in their career, So it's having this open conversation about, well, I can't do this week because I have caring responsibilities, or, I would prefer to install on a different day, or not having openings during school holidays. But I think it's also acknowledging that everyone is different and everyone has different sets of needs. And I think that that's the challenge with the art market, is that it is funneling you into a system that essentially doesn't work for most people.
So I can see in terms of the like logistics of shaping a program in a gallery and sort of supporting artists with those really practical needs. The other side of it, I guess, is how do you promote and tackle some of those more systemic perception barriers in the market? Because we know market-wise, price-wise, representation in museums, for example, is still very imbalanced for the genres, for the artists that you're working with. How do you tackle those more systemic, I guess, perception-based challenges in the market?
Mm. I think there's not, I think that's one of the main issue, is that we don't have enough data and statistics. I think there's hardly any data in representation on
No,
queer art.
there's a Burns Halperin report annually,
Mm.
but I think that looks at market performance and then how institutions are representing artists, I believe.
But I think if you're looking at institutions in the UK, um, in the most recent years, I think there was a statistics that were saying actually that over 50% of the solo exhibitions of institutions were by female artists. So at the institution level, it is happening. There is more representation. The challenge is definitely at the acquisition level in terms of rebalancing already, institutional collection, but also encouraging collectors to balance their collection. But then at the same time, the collectors and the people that are coming into the gallery are people that want to support this artist. And I think this is, collecting art has always been more than just putting artwork on your walls. It's not about buying an object, it's about participating into developing an ecosystem. It's about supporting the artist and supporting the galleries and supporting that wider artistic ecosystem. And I think, this there are plenty. I think it's about having this conversation and explaining that it goes beyond buying an object.
Yeah, it's that, not, I don't want to say education of collectors because I don't know, it sort of sounds patronizing, but it's that relationship, isn't it? That nurturing of a dialogue around these artists. And you sort of mentioned the artists that the gallery champions in terms of like the parameters. We're thinking about caregiving, women and queer artists. How do you select the artists you represent? Like, what's your curatorial, I guess, not remit, but how are you leaning towards particular artists?
So I think it's important to, to say, okay, this is a gallery that champions women and queer artists, but also I think it's also important to not pigeonhole women and queer artists to be making work necessarily about their identity. So, some of them want to do this, and that's important, and that's part of their practice. But also, some of them just happen to be women and queer artists, but might be talking about um, different topics. The way I choose artists is I'm not necessarily interested in the materiality of the artwork. I'm interested in research. So I'm interested in artists who you have a deep research, whether that's a research of the materials, whether that's a intellectual research, and whose message is conveyed through the artwork. I think we live in a time, I mean, art is a reflection of society. We live in a time which is very challenging. And I think this is why representation is important because art is a reflection of society and we need to be able to give spaces to these different voices. But essentially, when I'm looking at art, what I value is this making me think differently? That's what I value.
And I know your background, you obviously had a leaning towards performance art, but you cover a whole range of art forms. So as you say, that's not your focus necessarily limiting yourself to a particular art form. It is that focus on impact and message.
Yeah, I think it's a focus on impact and message. And I think it's also important to be able to reflect all different forms. We have an online screening room which shows, which we just reopened. We just opened our second edition of the screening room, which has been curated by Florence Fitzgerald Alsop, that's looking at interspecies relationships, where we platform one film per month, which is accessible to anyone on our website. And I think it's important to reflect that, art is not just painting, it's very wide and it speaks to different people. And so I think it's important to be able to show, yeah, film, performances, sculpture, paintings, poetry. I mean, it's the art is vast.
And you've been described, I can hear just how you talk about it. This sort of role as a gallery is like championing, enabling, advocating, creating these moments and opportunities for artists. There's a lot of discussion generally at the moment. I think, as you say, the economy, the society, it's quite challenging times. Running a gallery is difficult at the moment in terms of the business model. Um, Going back to sort of our original discussion around those parallel avenues of your career, how's that business foundation kind of helped you underpin this venture? Any advice for any other
Mm.
gallerists as well, because it is tough at the moment.
I think, it's because I haven't come from an art gallery. Um, I don't feel like I have to adhere to a particular conventional setup.
Yeah.
And I also think that at the moment, as a gallery, you have to be flexible and nimble and responsive. I think you have to think beyond the gallery walls. I think you have to, the screening room is a way to um, grow the community and access a different market through an online presence. But also, I'm interested in collaboration with other galleries. I did an exhibition in LA in July with a gallery based in LA with a British artist who I worked with who did a residency in LA and who wanted to show her artwork in LA. So it made a lot of sense to have this collaboration with another gallery in LA. So I think you just have you know, to think wider and to we and to think collaboratively.
I think that thing around flexibility as well, I think, or not conventional. I know that's your approach to sort of your business generally, but I think it could serve really well at the moment, in the particular climate. I know it's a discussion that a lot of galleries are having. Um, my final question is one I ask everybody. I think everyone dreads it, but if a lot of people that listen to the podcast are either starting out a career in the arts or they're considering it, or they're being advised against it. What would your advice be to someone not necessarily with a clear career path, but has an interest in joining the art market? What would your advice be in terms of tackling a career or trying to forge one?
I think if you are someone who wants to start a career in the art market, um, I think it I think it's useful to go and work actually for different parts of the industry. The art market is an ecosystem. So yes, of course, my gallery operates in the commercial sector, but I worked in a non-profit sector for a while. I worked with obviously Procreate Project, but I also was part of the creative board of UK New Artist, which is also a non-profit organization that supports the development of artists in the first 10 years of their career. Um, and I think having also my artistic practice has enabled me to have that insight and vision on the art world. So I think if you want to start and if you can have different experiences in different sectors of the art market, that will give you a good overview of how it works. Um, but essentially, I think the the biggest advice I can give is to believe in yourself and believe in your vision and talk to people around you. Um, we don't live in a vacuum. We're part of an art community, and we need to share experiences, whether they are experiences of success or experiences of struggles. We need to be able to share that. I think the art world can be a bit like smokes and mirrors from the outside. But I think actually on the inside, it's really important to have honest, transparent conversation with people around you, with colleagues. So you create a real exchange of information.
I know what you mean about like perceptions on the outside. But from my experience, I think a lot of our guests, the experience on the inside, if we can follow that analogy, that people are quite generous with their time and their advice and their experiences. If you do approach, we hear a lot of times people have had almost like an unofficial mentor where they've been able to get that advice and have quite open conversations with people, which I think is one of the art market's what's the word? Positives.
Yeah, I think most people end up in the art market because it was driven by a passion for the arts. Um, and that's why we are all here.
So
Uh,
true.
and I think we have to remember this is that, we are here because we have a real passion for the arts. Mo Most of us don't have a huge boundaries between personal and private life. You know, when does visiting an exhibition becomes a personal pleasure, or
So
it's
true.
art is very much seeps into your life and everything. Personally, everything that I do, has got some connection to the art. When I travel, or even when I'm with my children and I take them to, every school holidays we're at the Tate Modern, it's very much part of who we are. And so if we remember this, that this is the reason why we're here, and we can make our decisions based on this, and we can exchange information based on this, then you would find that, people are really open.
I think that's such a nice point to end, but also just to remember, because it's the same with collecting, isn't it? There's always talk about the market and stuff, but ultimately people tend to collect because they're passionate about the things they're collecting. So yeah, I definitely think that's a strong point to end on. Can I just thank you for your time? I know you're very busy and it's September, so all mothers will be busy right now, but really appreciate it. It's been fascinating. I now desperately want to travel the world again, but I feel like it's been a lovely, positive conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you for listening. You can follow and subscribe to The Bigger Picture wherever you get your podcasts. And to learn more about this episode or to reach out to us directly, please visit us at arcata.com.